have to fear is
In war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thank you for joining us today. Be sure and visit online at wallbuilders.com and also wallbuilderslive.com. We encourage you to check out those websites for a lot of reasons, one of which is there's just great information there. You can check out all kinds of topics on the Founding Fathers, on our founding principles, on cultural issues of the day. Everything we do here, we're looking at things from both a biblical and a historical point of view. Whatever you might be hearing about in the news, we're going to talk about it here on this program and look at it from what the Founding Fathers of America had to say about it, and certainly what the Bible has to say about it. So you can get all that information at our websites, and also email us if you've got some questions about things you'd like us to cover. Our Foundations of Freedom Thursday programs is a great opportunity to do that, and sometimes on our Good News Friday programs. But send us those emails at radio@wallbuilders.com. That's radio@wallbuilders.com. Also, check out our list of stations there on the website at wallbuilderslive.com. You can get us on radio stations across the country, and if we're not on a station in your community, you can help make that happen a couple of ways. Take some of our programs at the website, send them to that local station, and encourage them to pick up WallBuilders Live. And also, you may be a business owner that's looking for a great place to advertise. You can sponsor our program into a local station there in your area as well. So check out all that information at our website. Today, we're going to be jumping into a two-part series on Constitution Alive, the amendment process. So as many of you know, we have a Constitution program that David and I did. I'm Rick Green, and David Barton and I did a Constitution program at Independence Hall, where the Constitution was framed, and in David's library with the original documents. And we take you through every part of the Constitution. That DVD series, for more information, you can learn more about that at our website there at wallbuilders.com. But we have shared parts of it here on the radio program over the course of the last few months, as topics came up that we needed to dive a little deeper into. Well, one of those topics that right now is being discussed all across the country, there's about 30 states right now that are considering applying for a Article 5 Convention of States. They want to see some amendments to the Constitution to rein in the federal government, to put them back in their proper jurisdiction. Some of those things have been considered by members of Congress, but nothing's actually gained any momentum to be amended by Congress. And so this is a big topic right now. How to amend the Constitution, proper ways to amend the Constitution. Should the states do it, or should it always go through Congress? Well, what we do here at WallBuilders, and what we did in recording Constitution Alive, is we said, hey, let's go to the founders. Let's go see what they said about these things, and let's look at what has happened throughout history on this particular process. So we're going to share with you today and tomorrow one of the chapters in Constitution Alive. It's a fairly short segment. It's only going to take us 2 days to do this, but it covers the amendment process, how it's happened in the past, what the Founding Fathers set up, why they set it up the way that they did. And so we'll do part of that in the library there with David Barton at WallBuilders, and part of it will be there in Independence Hall at the Constitution class that we held there. So that's going to take place today and tomorrow. And then after it's over, you can take both of those links and share it with your friends and family and let them learn about the amendment process as well. There's no question that we need to save our Constitution, and the only way we're going to save it is by getting us back to the original intent of what the Constitution was intended to do, and get rid of these court-created concoctions, these interpretations by the court that have completely distorted the Constitution, and frankly given Congress the cover it needs to do things it was never intended to do. Because they can get away with that as long as the American people believe that the Constitution says it's okay for them to do that, and that's what the courts have said, because the courts have created a new Constitution never amended by the American people in the way that they've done it, and certainly given the federal government powers that we the people never gave them. So for more on that, we're going to dive into Constitution Alive and talk about the amendment process. Thanks for listening. We're going to jump right over now to David Barton and myself, Rick Green, at the WallBuilders Library for Constitution Alive. Welcome back to Constitutional Live with David Barton and Rick Green. It's time to talk about how do you actually change the Constitution, David? Is there a proper time to amend the Constitution? Obviously so. We've done it 27 times.
Well, the cool thing about Article 5 is this is the way to evolve the Constitution. You know, the progressive folks say, oh, it needs to be a living, breathing, evolving document. I agree, as long as the people are doing it. Yeah. Not as some unelected judge or someone else.
Or the president by him or herself. I mean, it's we the people doing it.
It's we the people, and the amendment process, the way it's required, it's a high enough bar that it has to be the people really behind it. It can't just be an interest group over here. You get people stirred up for a while. This is really a pretty cool book that it lists and covers all the constitutional amendments that have been proposed to the Constitution, and it goes from 1789 all the way up until this book is 1995. So,
you said proposed. So in other words, these are all the amendments that any member of Congress or a state has said, here's our suggestion on an amendment that should be done.
These are the ones that have officially been entered into Congress to look at action. So they've been written up, they've been drafted, they've been introduced, they had some action, and either the people weren't enough behind it or whatever else. Yeah. You know how many have been proposed in that period of time?
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. The key to a self-governing nation is self-governing people, and the key to personal self-government is to live by the standards in God's Word. If someone cannot control himself by those standards, then our Constitution certainly will be unable to restrain him. Understanding this, John Adams declared, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Greed, ambition, revenge, or seduction would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." John Adams believed that successful government rested not upon our great Constitution, but rather upon moral and religious people.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
You know how many have been proposed in that period of time? We're talking 206 years there.
I would say a bunch. So I would think a lot.
In that period of time, 10,900 amendments.
Well, that's more than I would have thought. I would have been thinking hundreds, but it's been thousands.
10,900, and how many of them have actually been added to the Constitution? 27.
27.
Which meant those are 27 the people wanted added. And so when they get added, the people get behind them because it has the support of the people.
Well, you said the bar's high. We want it to be high,
We
right?
want it to be high.
We want it to be a vast majority of the people.
The Founding Fathers of Constitutional Convention talked about if you let judges make policy and they start striking down stuff and implementing stuff, that people will lose respect for their government. And if you get a Supreme Court saying, here's national policy, and it dumps what 25 or 30 states had passed by their law, they've lost respect for it.
Yeah.
When it comes from the people, and the Constitution, Article 5, sets the bar high enough that for the people to make the change, you've got support for it, then they respect it. Then they go. And so Article 5 of the Constitution is really the answer to what they tell our kids today in schools and universities, what we hear from media pundits and law professors. Well, you know, we need a Constitution that keeps up with our needs today. Great. We the people know what our needs are. We'll tell you what our needs are. Don't you tell us what our needs are.
Yeah.
And so this really is we the people. And this is a fun book just to see all the things that have been proposed, you know. And some of them were really hot at the time. You would have thought they might have passed but this is the other thing about our Constitution. It requires your feelings to slow down over time.
Yeah.
And you can't just do it merely on passion. That's a democracy that runs on passion. A republic has to run on reason. And so by the time you have debates, by the time you get the states involved, by the time it goes through, sometimes you say, you know, it's not the big issue it was a year and a half ago, and I don't think I support it anymore because all the passion was there. So it really is a fun book to look at.
That means there was a lot of wisdom that went into designing even this one article in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. I mean, they really made sure if you're going to change this, that's fine. If times change and you need to make an amendment to the Constitution, fine, but we got the high bar. It's going to take time. And they really thought through this, and that's why it's been, you know, so rare that it got amended. But there might be some amendments that we need to consider going into the future.
That's right. And that'll be up to we the people.
Yeah.
And if there are some things we feel passionate about, and right now people do feel passionate about the government being a threat to their liberties.
Yeah.
I mean, the national polling is overwhelming that the greatest danger they see to their liberties is the government. Well, maybe it's time to restrain some of those things that through things like the misinterpretation of the General Welfare Clause and necessary and proper and all that. Maybe we say, no, guys, you should have been reading the original books at the beginning. We, the people, still support the original belief. Let's squeeze it back.
Well, that then is not really a change. That's reasserting or clarifying what the original intent was. We're not changing how the system would work in those cases. We're really clarifying and restoring what was intended.
I've been part of several attempted constitutional amendments in Congress, and one of them was what was called the Community Life Amendment, and it was because there was such a big push from the people because the courts were so squeezing down how we could express our faith. The people were outraged, and they still are, polling-wise. So the Speaker of the House at that time took a member of Congress and said, all right, let's come up with a constitutional amendment that restores the First Amendment, free exercise of religion. And so he chose about a dozen of us, and so we worked on the language of the amendment, held hearings across the country, congressional travel hearings, and the whole deal was, let's look at all the court cases out there that have restricted what the Founding Fathers gave us with freedom of religion. Now it's become freedom from religion. Yeah. Let's go back to the... And so we did that, and we got, I think, 269 co-sponsors on the amendment. I mean, it was a huge, massive thing, but we didn't get it passed. Yeah. I mean, you can get through one body sometimes, not the other. So to have both bodies do something, you really got to have this. It can't be a red amendment or a blue amendment. You're going to have red and blue that come together and say, this is the change we want for the country. And that makes it much safer. Because when it's just red or blue, the other feel like they got to retaliate. You know, you did this to me, so I'm going to cram this down your throat. Now, the Founding Fathers are very wise in putting this together in such a way that once it gets done, it's because the people themselves supported it.
All right, we're going to go back to Philly, and we're going to learn how to amend the Constitution, the specifics of how the process takes place, and we'll even talk about some of those possible amendments going into the future. Let's head back to Independence Hall.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Christians have always believed that the greatest life-changing experience available to any individual is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and the testimonies of numerous converts confirm the dramatic changes which often accompany salvation. One such testimony of change comes from Founding Father Noah Webster, who explained, "I was led by a spontaneous impulse to repentance, prayer, and entire submission and surrender of myself to my Maker and Redeemer. I now began to understand and relish many parts of the Scriptures which before appeared mysterious and unintelligible. In short, my view of the Scriptures, of religion, of the whole Christian scheme of salvation, and of God's moral government are very much changed. The power of God to change a life yielded to Him was just as evident at the time of the Founding Fathers as it still is today."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
The amendment process is actually an important part that we want to cover as well. It's just another one of those things we want to know where to plug in. Hasn't happened in a while. We talked last night about the 27th Amendment and the fact that that's the last one that's been put in the Constitution, but it was actually adopted by Congress more than 200 years ago. But just for our own knowledge of how an amendment would take place, if we wanted to amend the Constitution, if there was something in the amendment in the Constitution that we wanted to change, and there are a few things I'd like to see change in the Constitution. It's not perfect. As we said, we're becoming a more perfect union. So there's a few things in there I'd like to change as well. But here's how you got to do it. Two ways you can amend the Constitution. This is all right out of Article 5. We're not going to read through the whole thing, but let's just look at how it works. First option, and this is the way that they've all 27 been done, is Congress adopts the amendment first. So if Congress passes by 2/3 in both the House and the Senate an amendment to the Constitution, then it goes to the states. And then the states would either have ratification by their state legislatures or by constitutional convention. Most all the 27 were done by state legislatures. If recollection's right, there's 2 that were done by conventions, and that's it. Everything else by the state legislatures. The second option is a convention of states, as outlined in Article 5. And the best way to learn about this is to go to a website, conventionofstates.com. And I also recommend that you read the book by Mark Levin called Liberty Amendments. Now, this is done essentially without Congress. The only thing Congress does in this process is set the date and the location. So this is going to be something that the states want to do. It takes 34 states to call for the Convention of States, and then they would gather, and there's already a major movement taking place on this. Several states have called, and I urge you to go to that website, conventionofstates.com, because it really lays it out. It answers all of the objections. There's a lot of questions that people have about how this would work. Everything is answered at that website in an it's extremely effective in the way that they do it. Mike Ferris, and he's from Homeschool Legal Defense, and his argued case before the Supreme Court is brilliant on this subject, has an incredible Constitution class I highly recommend. He is heading up the organizational side of this, and then Mark Meckler, big Tea Party guy, has teamed up with him to do this. So I encourage you to check that out, conventionofstates.com. And then I really do encourage you to read Liberty Amendments by Mark Levin. I truly do believe it's the most important book on the Constitution of our day. Even more important than my book, okay? That tells you how much I'm a big fan of it. I used to think dangerous, bad idea. But now I'm beginning to see the wisdom of the Founding Fathers that it's actually a good opportunity for we the people to get some amendments to the Constitution that need to be done, and then let the states decide whether or not it's whether it's a good or a bad idea. And with 13 states having the veto power, you know, frankly, and look, from my perspective and the way I lean on this thing and the momentum of the country right now to come back to constitutional governance, if we want to once again have a constitutional republic that reflects what these guys wanted, there's some good amendments that we could get done, and the momentum is with us. Most states, the number of states, side with us. The more progressive, if you will, living, breathing Constitution kind of folks, they have a fewer number of states. Now, we're about split in terms of numbers of people in the country, but when you break down the number of states, we have the advantage. I'll throw out a couple of my favorite. This is where I got the microphone, so I get to go for my amendments for the moment, and then we'll open it up and let you guys. Here's a couple of mine. Balanced budget amendment. I think we need one. All right, I just think we got to rein them in. We got to put some sort of limits on these trillion-dollar deficits that we're passing on to our kids. I mean, we just can't withstand this anymore. We got a parental rights amendment. That's my second top priority on an amendment to the Constitution. Two reasons for this one. The first one is the UN Treaty on the Rights of the Child. Really bad deal. Put your 12-year-old in charge of your house. I mean, it sounds great when you first look at the first paragraph, and then it goes downhill from there. It's a bad idea, and we don't need to allow it to happen. If you read the language in Article 6, treaties are equal to the Constitution. The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. So what happens when you allow that treaty to be adopted, it's equal to the Constitution and it's above your state law. So if the UN Treaty on the Rights of the Child is adopted, then family law in America, in your individual state, will be trumped by this international family law. It specifically says, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. So no matter what your state family law says, this new treaty is going to trump that. It's a bad deal. Don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I encourage you to go to parentalrights.org. Parentalrights.org. That's the movement to get the parental rights amendment into the Constitution. It just basically says parents are the ones that are supposed to raise their children and have the final say with their children. I said the UN Treaty on the Rights of the Child was the first reason. The second reason I want this amendment is because a lot of our state CPS organizations are overstepping their bounds. I used to deal with this a lot in the legislature. I had friends that had their children taken when there was not abuse going on in the home, but because of an anonymous tip or because a social worker didn't like that family, or somebody complained because they didn't like the politics of that family. I mean, look, I'm telling you, I'm a pro-life, constitutional guy. I homeschool my children. I am on the Janet Napolitano domestic terrorist watch list probably for the things that I believe, right? Because I'm on that side of the political debates of our day. I'm also on the CPS doesn't like me list because I push legislation through in Texas that gives parents the final say on immunization choices. I'm not anti-immunization. There's just some of them that I don't want my kids to get. Some that I do, some that I don't. I don't want the state to tell me. If I can research and figure out which ones I think my kids are most susceptible to and do those and not the others, that's my choice. I push legislation to do that. So CPS doesn't like me. Let me just tell you right now. They think I'm a bad parent. So I'm one of those guys that's susceptible to a social worker showing up and saying, hey, we got a complaint, you're abusing your kids, we got to take them out, and we'll let you have them back after our investigation. That's a bad situation. I've had families crying in my office before. It took months to get their kids back when there was no abuse taken. I mean, it's a bad deal. Parentalrights.org. Parental Rights Amendment of the Constitution will put an end to that. I am all for getting a kid out of an abusive situation. I will help get that done. But if you want to take somebody out of the home while you're investigating, get me out of the house, all right? Let my kids stay with my wife, or let my kids go to grandparents' house or uncle or aunt's. You know, another part of the problem is a lot of times you get a 22-year-old social worker walking in on a situation that hasn't raised kids. And you know, let me tell you, my kids had a bump on their head most of their time between 0 and 10, right? I mean, because we live out in the country, we're rowdy, they do crazy stuff. You know, there wasn't abuse going on, but the kids were having fun, and things happen. Social worker came in my house, I guarantee you that had been like, oh, somebody's beating these kids. No, nobody's beating the kids. They're beating themselves. I mean, that's what happens when you jump off the trampoline onto the house or whatever they were doing. Anyway, so Parental Rights Amendment. Check it out, parentalrights.org. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty in Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Human Life Amendment, another one we need. It's something that would be done at the federal level because we have a federal need for this. If you just leave it up to the states, it'll be just like the slavery mistake that these guys made. They believed that if we left it up to the states, we'd be rid of slavery within a generation. They got it wrong, right? Now, they couldn't have gotten it right because there's no way if they had ended slavery, you wouldn't have had the Union. It just wouldn't have happened. But their faulty concept was, as Rhett said up here last night, he said, out of the Declaration, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. What rights? What did he say they were? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the purpose of government is to secure liberty, and we didn't do it. We only did it at the state or local level, and so if the state didn't do it, the feds didn't step in until we had a civil war, then the feds stepped in. The point is, we should have been securing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness at every level of government. Same thing with the Human Life Amendment. The reason for it is because the first right listed in the Declaration, the number one priority of our government, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Why? To secure life. It's an important part of what government ought to do. So I support a Human Life Amendment so we'd do that at every level, not just at one or the other. Marriage Amendment, these guys would have thought, that's crazy. Why would you ever need that? Now we've got this patchwork of, I mean, our family law is so confusing now because if you have marriage defined as one thing in one state and another thing, it's just a mess. I think we need a marriage amendment to the Constitution. Term limits. How many of you guys support term limits? I bet we're split. Okay, how many are against term limits? Wow, I figured it'd be about half and half. I used to be very much against them. The smartest woman in the world got a hold of me. Not Hillary, it was my wife. Anyway, so my wife got a hold of me. She said, look, baby, all these people that we came into office with, they've been there 15, 20 years. They've become part of the problem. They're furniture. They're not even motivated anymore, or they become so squishy on everything. And I started looking at it. I was going, you know, you're right. Not only is it bad for the system for somebody to serve for 30 years, it's bad for the person to serve for 30 years. But I had a hard time with what I used to always say, which was, but then the lobby's going to run the show. Because if they know that a legislator's only going to be there 6 years or 8 years or 10 years, then they're going to run the show instead of, and then I started watching you know how the founders talked about the states being the incubators of ideas so you could try it in certain states. I started watching Florida, and I started watching Oklahoma, and these other states that were doing term limits. Like, wow, hey, this is working pretty good. Look in Florida right now. If you're a Marco Rubio fan, Marco Rubio would not be in the U.S. Senate right now if it hadn't been for term limits in Florida, because that's what allowed him to move up in the legislature and become Speaker so soon. And then as Speaker, he had a statewide profile, was able to move for U.S. Senate. It's actually worked very well. The guys, instead of saying, oh, the lobby's going to run the show, they're getting into office and they're saying, hey, I only got 6 years. I really don't care what you think as a lobbyist. I'm going to get my job done right now, and I'm going to go push through what it is, and they hit the ground running. So the incubators have worked pretty well, and watching that has caused me to shift, and mostly because my wife says I better, shift my position on this and say that I'm now for term limits, and I don't even care what they are. They can be 10 years, they can be 15 years, whatever the number is. At some point, they're done, and they got to go home. And I'm not worried about losing the, what's the phrase I used to always use? I used to say, but what about the institutional knowledge that we'd lose? I kind of want to lose some of that institutional knowledge at this point. I'm kind of thinking we need some new blood, not the folks that have been there for 30, 40 years. So anyway, last one for me, I mentioned earlier, defining the term of federal judges. You know, again, just making sure that it's not this nebulous for good behavior, but it's now a definite amount of time. And in both those cases, let's not forget, we limited the presidency to 2 terms because we, the people, said more than that is too much. That's allowing one person to accumulate too much power because they're there too long. I just think we ought to do that for the other 2 branches as well and limit them in some way. So that's my list. Let's open it up. You can comment on any of those, for or against them, or you might have some other amendments that you think we ought to do. Well, we're out of time for today, folks. That is, we're in the middle of a 2-part series on Constitution Alive, and that's what you were just listening to, was David Barton and myself, Rick Green, covering this amendment process as covered in our Constitution series. For more information about the complete series, where we walk through the entire Constitution, visit our website at WallBuilders.com and click on that link for Constitution Alive. We're going to pick up where we left off today. Tomorrow we'll cover the rest of this particular section of Constitution Alive on the amendment process. We'll be doing that tomorrow, so be sure and tune in for WallBuilders Live tomorrow. Thank you for listening today to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green.
We stand undivided.